Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar on farm biosecurity and how best to prepare your farm. As we let people into the webinar, feel free to use the chat function at the bottom of the Zoom window and let us know who you are and where you're tuning in from. It'll be great to see where everyone is all around that are tuning in. And we will kick off with the content in just a couple of minutes as we get everyone into the webinar. We're really excited to have industry leaders from both Integrity Systems Company and Livestock SA with us. So it's set to be a great discussion. Yeah, we'll get underway in a couple of moments. And for those still joining, welcome to the webinar today. We're just waiting a couple of moments for everyone to jump in and then we will kick off. Feel free to use the chat function and to let us know where you're tuning in from, as well as the Q&A function for any questions that you might have. And that's great. We've got Marie from AgForce in Queensland. And Nick, thanks for letting us know. It looks like the chat might be disabled. We can have a quick look at that for you, but feel free to use our Q&A function as well. Alrighty, let's dive into it. To kick things off, I want to say a big thank you to everyone who is joining. It's set to be a great discussion around farm biosecurity and how best to prepare for any risks associated on your farm. My name is David O'Brien, and I'll be hosting the webinar today on behalf of AgriWebb. My background, I studied ag science and I've been leading our customer support team here at AgriWebb for 4 years. And during my time at AgriWebb, I've seen firsthand how AgriWebb as a service has helped thousands of producers to be audit ready and meet the compliance and biosecurity requirements within Australia. And so I believe it's incredibly important to raise the awareness of how to practically prepare your business to mitigate any biosecurity risks and to stay compliant. So that's why we're here today, to discuss those elements there. And today we have with us Elizabeth Bradley from Integrity Systems Company. Now, Elizabeth is the Manager for Quality, Policy and Compliance with Integrity Systems. Elizabeth oversees the compliance for the Livestock Production Assurance Program, the NLIS animal identification approvals, and is also charged with implementing any improvements to both of these systems. Having worked as an auditor with the federal government, Elizabeth has first-hand knowledge of Australia's biosecurity and export legislation, policy, and all the operations. So together with this knowledge and her passion for technology, it really allows Elizabeth to be effective in implementing efficiencies and areas of improvement within the red meat integrity system. We also have Pene Keynes with us. Pene grew up on a sheep and cattle property in South Australia and was appointed as a Biosecurity Extension Officer at Livestock SA in 2020 to deliver the Biosecurity Extension Project that was also funded by PIRSA, Red Meat and Wool Growth Program. Since then, Pene has taken on the role of Project Manager for this organisation. And Pene has extensive industry experience in sheep, cattle and dairy enterprises with a background in agricultural science and agribusiness. So suffice to say, we have some incredibly talented industry experts here on the webinar with us. And I can't wait to dive into the discussion with them. But first of all, for everyone tuning in, I just wanted to run through a quick agenda of what we'll be covering today. So I'll be quickly covering an introduction to AgriWebb for those who are joining who might be new to AgriWebb, and an indication of the key features in AgriWebb that can support with biosecurity, audit and compliance, particularly for any existing customers that are tuning in today, giving you the ability to jump into AgriWebb almost immediately and start to make use of those. After that, we will hear from Elizabeth on the current biosecurity risks in Australia and the role of Integrity Systems Company within that. And then we will hear from Pene on some of the best practices and what you can do to prepare for future risks at a practical level. After that, we will have time for Q&A to answer any questions. So please feel free to use the Q&A function. We will be going through those and posing those questions as discussion throughout, if time allows, and then also at the end. So to kick things off into an introduction of AgriWebb, I'm sure it'll resonate with many of you how, often at times it can feel disconnected and challenging when trying to manage your enterprises and communicate to your trusted advisors, and particularly in times like this when biosecurity risks are higher and the need to be audit ready and compliant are paramount. At AgriWebb, we strive to connect these elements together with our digital farming software, which empowers you to do more with your data and to stay compliant. So we take care of your livestock, pasture and cropping management with an easy to use mobile app that works both online and offline. So the age-old connectivity issues are no longer an issue. As the webinar continues, we'll highlight the key elements for compliance in which AgriWebb can help you mitigate the risks with biosecurity plans, the NLIS and ENVD integrations, and many other audit and compliance features, such as your livestock treatment inventory, automated reporting, and the ability to record expiry dates and batch numbers. So with all of this available, before we dive into things, I'd encourage you to take advantage of the 30% off of a new subscription if you wanted to get a head start in your biosecurity and compliance preparation. We will be sending out resources and a quick video as well on how to access the biosecurity feature in some emails after this. So make sure to dive into that along with the resources and reach out to us if you would like to take advantage there. So with all of that, I'd like to introduce Elizabeth to firstly give everyone listening today a recap of the current situation that the livestock industry faces with the risks of both foot and mouth disease and lumpy skin disease. So Elizabeth, I will stop sharing my screen and I'll hand over to you to share yours and to dive into the discussion.
Great, thank you.
And just a reminder for everyone as we are getting the slides up, as you're listening through, take some notes and make sure to make use of the Q&A function to send through the questions.
Great, thanks, David. So yes, I'm Elizabeth, and today I'm going to talk about basically the current situation. I'll give you an overview of the current government and industry action that's happening, and then tie that into why livestock movement records and traceability is really important in relation to biosecurity and in the event of an emergency animal disease outbreak, such as foot and mouth disease or lumpy skin disease. So traceability and biosecurity go hand in hand. And this information I'm about to share is around our current integrity system requirements, so the NLIS and LPA. But I just want to sort of point out before we start that this is exactly why we have these systems in place, to protect us against the threats of these diseases. So to start off with just a bit of an overview about the government and the sort of industry action that's going on. As a first and foremost, FMD and LSD have not been detected in Australia, so we remain free of both diseases. And the government is doing a lot to keep both of them out of Australia and have a really strong biosecurity controls in place at the border. So both the state governments and the federal government, in conjunction with industry, are undertaking a range of activities to manage the biosecurity risks posed by FMD and LSD, and they're actively engaged with industry in Indonesia on controlling it and preventing it and putting in planning measures. So the Australian Veterinary Plan, also known as the AusVet Plan, which you might have heard floating around, is a document that's nationally agreed to the approach in response to an animal disease outbreak. And some of the current measures the federal government is taking to combat foot and mouth disease and LSD include increasing international border measures for passengers and goods arriving from Indonesia, including those sanitation foot mats and biosecurity officers at airports and ports. They're working with Indonesia at the moment to contain and control both diseases. This includes $14 million in funding and vaccine supply. They're also boosting education and awareness amongst Australians, increasing disease surveillance and preparedness, especially in Northern Australia, where there's a risk of mosquitoes blowing across. And they're also looking at different initiatives like feral pest control programs and things like that. And also they're investing into projects to build capacity of controlling diseases in surrounding countries as well. And the state and territory governments are also responsible for preparedness and getting ready, and they're also responsible for the operational response in their own jurisdiction if it was detected. So if the disease is detected and confirmed, then the AusVet plan gets enacted, which is the responsibility of currently Animal Health Australia. And that plan in itself is regularly reviewed, tested, and it's being updated and maintained as we speak. Now, MLA and ISC, and what our role is in this preparedness, I guess, event, where MLA is the dedicated marketing and research body for the red meat industry. So our role is to support government and industry. In conjunction with the Australian government, MLA has been working closely with the Indonesian government on biosecurity support programs to help control the spread of the diseases. And we're also an active member of the industry task force that's working on planning and preparedness. We're also technical experts, and we're investing into things like vaccine development and treatment solutions as well. And ISC, or Integrity Systems Company, lots of acronyms in our industry. We're part of MLA, and we administer the Livestock Production Assurance Program, or LPA, and we also provide the NLIS database, which is used to identify and trace animals through the supply chain. So why is traceability so important? Well, it assists us in quickly responding and mitigating disease spread if we do get a detection. So if a disease like FMD or LSD is detected, the AusVet plan gets enacted and a national livestock standstill will actually occur, and that can be up to 72 hours. And those 72 hours are critical because that's when tracing with the NLIS is basically critical. So we need to find out where infected animals are located, where they've been, and then determine if other animals have been in contact with them. So by doing that tracing, we can then stop further livestock movements from occurring past that standstill, and we isolate and contain the spread of the disease. So the rest of the country can start kind of moving again. So if our traceability data isn't accurate, these diseases could be spreading without being contained, which is really quite serious. So the National Livestock Identification System, is commonly known as the NLIS, is Australia's system for the identification of cattle, sheep and goats, and that's how we trace them. NLIS is a legislative compliance requirement which is enforced by each state and territory, and it requires livestock be identified and their movements recorded. The data allows us to do the livestock tracing, and another system that we also use to assist in that is the National Vendor Declarations, or NVDs, which come under the LPA program. And it should be noted that you need to be LPA accredited to use the LPA NVDs when moving livestock off your property. So as a recap over the NLIS and some little tips in here about traceability, NLIS consists of 3 central components: animal identification being one, property identification codes or PICs, and then recording livestock movements in the database. So yeah. property identification code is sort of the location of livestock, and it's issued to each property or producer depending on where you're located, and the states and territories issue these to you. So PICs are really important because the regulators can actually apply status to a PIC if it's identified as being infected with a disease, and that means that they can trace what's on the PIC and what's moving off and on it. So they're really important in a disease outbreak. So if you have moved or bought or leased or sold recently, it's really important that you make sure your PIC details are valid with your state or territory department, and make sure your contact details are up to date, because if the diseases do occur and are detected and they need to contact you, you need to make sure your details are correct so they can do so. Animal identification is the next component of the NLIS. So animals have to be identified with accredited devices, and that's also a legal requirement. And they have to be tagged before they leave their property of birth, and then every subsequent property after that. When a tag is purchased, basically it's issued to a PIC, so that's how it kind of links in together. And cattle have to have an electronic identification device or an EID, and sheep and goats can be identified with either an EID or a visual tag, except in Victoria, where they have the mandatory EID for sheep and goats. So once they're tagged, the tag needs to remain with the animal for its lifetime, unless it stops working or it falls out, and then they get re-tagged. So sort of the basic 101s of animal identification. But if the animal's on its property where it was born, it can be always re-tagged with a breeder tag. For cattle, it's a white tag. And if it's not on the property of birth, it's got to be tagged with a post-breeder tag. So I guess the tips around this are to ensure that you have enough tags on your property, both the breeder and post-breeder, and that you are tagging animals before they leave your property. So the third component of the NLIS, and arguably one of the important ones in tracing, is recording livestock movements in the database. So as cattle in Australia and then sheep and goats in Victoria have an electronic identification, they're generally scanned using a reader, and then the tags are basically uploaded to the database and then moved from PIC to PIC. So this can be done with a file or manually, and in AgriWebb's case, using third-party software. And sheep and goats are identified with a visual tag, get moved as a mob. So it's usually, 100 head of sheep get moved from one PIC to another in the database. Movements need to be recorded as quickly as possible, especially if there's a disease outbreak. And generally the transfer needs to be completed in 48 hours of the movement occurring as well. So I will note that it is the responsibility of the person receiving livestock or receiving them onto your property to ensure that that movement in the database has been recorded. So if you're moving them off to a sale yard, to a feedlot, to an abattoir, they'll be responsible for the transfer, so that, job done sort of thing. But if it's a private sale and you're buying it from another property it's a property to property sale, is what it's usually called. The buyer or the receiver of the livestock have to do the livestock movement in the database. And so just some things to note about this is the person selling the livestock or sending them doesn't have to do the transfer, but it's always good to check it's been done. And selling platforms like Auctions Plus don't do transfers for you, so that's something to be aware of. And if you are using an agent, a sale yard, you're sending to a feedlot, make sure you request the upload ID potentially as well to make sure that that transaction's actually happened. All producers can create an NLIS account as well to check for movement records on and off your PIC, and making sure that those transfers are actually correct. And livestock consignments need to be accompanied by a movement record. So that's the LPA NVD if you're LPA accredited, or ENVD or whatever that you're using. And so the NVD serial number can also be recorded in the NLIS transfer, which sort of just links that consignment with that transfer and aids in boosting that traceability. And states and territories might also require additional documentation, especially if there's health issues concerned with those livestock. So things like weigh bills or animal health declarations are also needed in some cases. So transfers and movement records need to be completed correctly, and that's because lifetime traceability will be lost if you don't do it. And that basically leads to delays in tracing livestock if we're in a standstill, as the data's not in the system and we've got gaps. Just to note, you can create an NLIS account and check things out yourself. You can do lots of reports on the database. You can check what active devices you have on your pick. You can correct issues if there's errors, run reports. Yeah, but basically the most important thing is to check that transfers on and off your pick are completed. And if there's discrepancies or errors, make sure you investigate them and sort them out straight away. And I will point out that one of the most serious issues for the NLIS is when livestock movements don't get recorded in the database. So, as I mentioned earlier, livestock will lose their traceability if this occurs, and that gap is the enormous risk in the event of a disease outbreak, because infected livestock might have been moving around and we can't trace them. So it's sort of like contact tracing with COVID. If we don't know where people were and if they were sick, we can't, let other people know if they might have been exposed. So the best way to prevent this from happening is to check that every transfer is completed correctly when livestock move on and off your pick. And you can do that if you have an NLIS account or get the upload ID. And now that I've run through sort of the NLIS and the traceability components under that, I just wanted to touch on NVDs and around consignments and completing NVDs and biosecurity under LPA. So as I mentioned, LPA NVDs or access to ENVDs is only possible if you're LPA accredited. So I'm just going to explain a little bit about that for you. LPA has 7 requirements. So 2 of them that you might notice on the screen that are really applicable in this situation is livestock transactions and movements and biosecurity. So while producers need to ensure they're always meeting the requirements under LPA, traceability and biosecurity in this regard are tied closely together. So number 5 in LPA is livestock transactions and movements. And it basically means that livestock movements have to be completed to make sure that you can trace your animals. So using NVDs is the basis of it. So to meet the requirement under LPA, you have to make sure that movements between picks or properties are accompanied with a current and correctly completed NVD or an ENVD. And you need to have sufficient records for purchased livestock. So like any livestock coming onto your property, you need to have a record to say how many came on, which is usually a copy of the incoming NVD for those stock, and also dispatch livestock. And that needs to reconcile with what's on the NLIS as well. LPA also does require that you have animals identified with NLIS accredited devices and that your NLIS transfers are completed. And all of that can be audited as a compliance requirement. So LPA can audit based on all of that, and so can your state and territory departments. So it is a compliance requirement that will get checked at some point. So it's important that they're correct and accurate and given to the right people when you're doing these movements. And the requirement number 6 in LPA is actually about biosecurity. So LPA has a requirement to have a documented biosecurity plan in place. So producers must implement biosecurity systems to minimise the risk of infectious disease being introduced onto livestock production properties and subsequent spread of any such diseases. So kind of fits right into this at the moment. Now, I know Pene is going to run through some more specific examples about biosecurity plans and actions. So I'm just going to share at a high level what the requirements are under LPA, which it's pretty straightforward. It's to have a documented plan to make sure that you've identified the risks and you're taking measures to reduce those risks where practical. And that also, you've implemented the plan, trained your staff, and you're reviewing it annually. So that at a high level is the requirement under LPA. And to meet LPA, you can use any template. We've got one available. I know there's loads out there, but any format under LPA is acceptable so long as you've got the risks addressed. And so just to sort of summarise, the things you can do from an integrity system or a traceability and LPA perspective is just to check your pick, make sure you've got an account, keep your accreditation current, identify your risks with your biosecurity plan, complete your NVDs, get animal identification if you haven't got any. So yeah, it's really critical to get this right to help protect our industry, but that's sort of me. So thanks, David.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And just while we've got that summary page up there, I'd encourage everyone listening in to write those points down. I was taking extensive notes during that as well, so I found that really beneficial. Elizabeth, we do have a couple of questions. So one of them is around sheep tagging. Given that the NLIS system will be used to track stock movements in the first 72 hours, how do we envisage that working with sheep where not all of them are tagged at the moment in some states?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess that's the benefit of having EID, is that you're able to actually track individual animals a lot more effectively. So the government, collectively federal and state, announced a few weeks ago that they are going to roll out mandatory sheep and goat EID across the country. Each state and territory, though, is responsible for that. So they're still planning how they're going to get all that sorted out in terms of infrastructure required. So it's basically do your mob-based movements, make sure the sheep and goats have got their ear tags, because even though they're using a visual tag, they still have the PIC number. So you're able to kind of know, and that's why the NVDs are so important, because you can actually link movement records from the NVD with the tags and the PIC of birth, or the ear notches and things like that. So it's it's not as good as the ID, but it is possible to trace. It's just a bit harder and a bit slower. So if you can complete the transfers in the database as quickly as possible, it does sort of help in that regard.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose leading into that in a moment when we hear from Pene in some more practical ways to be recording that from an AgriWebb perspective, those movements, whether it's mob or at an individual level, are so important. And I think one of the key messages out of today is around, while the larger system is in place to focus on outbreaks and the responses to that, the accountability for all of us on the ground is to make sure that we can focus on the areas that we can control. So things like those movements and updating those records are all things that are within our means to control at the moment. And I think that's one of the key messages as well. There's just one other question on that area, and specific to PICs, best practice there. So is it best to split up PICs if properties are held in different geographic locations, and where that's set up to enable ongoing trade in between? But in the case of an outbreak, what would you suggest there?
So I guess we don't really have any control over how PICs work, unfortunately. So for example, Victoria might issue, multiple people on the same PIC on the same property, a different PIC, so you can identify where they look. Yeah, so it's really hard. I think as long as you have a good idea of where livestock are on your PIC, and you can kind of do it that way. You can talk to your state or territory about, if you want to have different PICs for different properties that are far away. It all really depends on how the states kind of plan and do their PIC issuing. So I don't really have any sort of advice on that other than keep good records, because we don't actually have any control over how the states issue PICs. Sorry.
No, that's fine. That's some good information there. We will need to move on and hear from Pene, and I do understand there are a few more questions there. Some of them are quite specific, and so in those instances, I would encourage you to reach out to the either state or government body in your area, as well as Integrity Systems Company. And we will be providing resources at the end of the webinar and in the follow-up content for you to contact those bodies and ask these specific questions about your area and your enterprise, which I think will be helpful. So definitely encourage the questions, and also encourage the research on your end as well. Okay, so Pene, it would be great if you can dive in and give us your expertise on, some of the best practice that you're seeing and the work that you're doing at Livestock SA.
Thank you. Are you seeing my screen okay?
Yes, we've got that.
Great. Thanks for that. Thank you, AgriWebb, for inviting me here today. I think it's a really important topic to be covering at this time, and I've been working on this space for 2.5 years, and I've really seen a real uptick in people being interested in on-farm biosecurity at the moment, and I think that's a really great thing because it's going to really improve our whole system and all of our on-farm practices, because biosecurity is so critical. So who am I? I'm Pene Keynes. So as was introduced earlier, I come from a sheep and cattle farm in around the Barossa Valley in South Australia. So please excuse me if today I do actually defer back to South Australia. I do talk a lot about to South Australian farmers. So I'll try and keep it very top level and make sure that it's the Australian message. Livestock SA is the state farming organisation here that represents sheep, cattle and goat producers. So my role as project manager and working on biosecurity is really feeding into our member needs and industry really backing biosecurity. So I really want to focus today on what we can control as producers. There's so many concerns, and I know Elizabeth touched on them at the start about, all the different things that are happening overseas, and yes, they are concerns, and it's great to be across them. But I think the main thing that we can really control and should be focusing our efforts on right now is best practice biosecurity and those practices that you're doing on your property to mitigate biosecurity risks. So really having that watertight biosecurity plan, which will have benefits for your whole property. So if you're looking at it from a FMD, foot mouth disease, or a lumpy skin disease, or any of the diseases that are sort of, they're offshore at the moment. So yes, they're a concern, but we're not having any control over it. But the things that we can do now can actually improve all of the other conditions and diseases and pests and weeds that can also have an impact on your bottom line. So really being able to focus on some of those key activities that we've been promoting all the way through. And like Elizabeth said, the LPA program does have a requirement. So everyone should have a biosecurity plan. So it really allows for early detection of management and the impacts of those diseases and pests on producers' properties. So how I'm going to structure today is really about some 5 top tips that I've been promoting through my networks and talking to a lot of producers about, because I think being able to distill all of the different messages and being able to provide every single person individual responses to every question is really hard. We need to have some broad tips right now to be able to go through. So the first one I would suggest is being able to know your risks. The second one, have a plan. Number 3, keep records. And 4, come clean, stay clean, go clean, and look, check, ask a vet. Those are the top 5 ones, and we'll go through each of them individually. But the other thing I would really like to impart on you is to save that number that's on the screen. The Emergency Animal Disease Watch hotline is really important to and critical to being able to report these issues. So every producer in Australia really should have that 1-800-675-888 number in their phone. So if you haven't got it already, please do. So now we're going to delve into a little bit more of the detail. So every business should know their risks. So the best way to do this is through an on-farm property risk assessment. And there's a lot of information out there if you do want to have a look at it and look at more detail, but I'm just going to go at a really high level about what it looks like to me. So it really is about reviewing the risks and where your greatest threats are coming from. What are the diseases in your area? What are the pests? What are the weeds? What are the things that I should be looking out for? And what are the different things that I can do and be aware of around those to mitigate those risks? So I think it's really hard to be able to talk about every single person's risk because there are so many and you have to really be across all the different areas. But I'm just going to use an example. So if you're buying cattle from a sale yard perspective, you're going to have a different set of risks to someone who is a closed herd in a cattle example. And then again, if you're that person buying those cattle on a sale yard, from a sale yard and putting it into a feedlot is going to be completely different to if you're buying it from a sale yard and putting it out onto your extensive farm and putting them, trying to integrate them into your herd, such as breeding animals. So there's these risks that we take on every day, and knowing your risk appetite is really critical. But being able to understand where the main risks come from means that you can protect against them. So I think the other thing that people should be doing is thinking about the consequences and the likelihood of these diseases, so you can categorise and prioritise some of these risks. So there's a combination of things that we think about, but if we use the foot and mouth disease scenario at the moment, we can look at it. I would probably say that likelihood is, well, we've been told 12%. That's probably, I'm going to categorise it as low to moderate. It's not very high, but we're doing all the things at the border to be able to stop it. But then if we think about the consequence of foot and mouth disease, it's very high. So we're looking at a low likelihood or a moderate likelihood, but a very high. So we're going to categorise that as high. So what are the level of risk ratings that we should be putting in? So that's high on this risk rating part to the right of the screen. I'd be saying it's high and intervention is required. So what are the interventions that we can be doing at the moment? And that is getting your biosecurity right. So that's probably if any of those the risk assessments really need to be categorised and prioritised. Number 2, have a plan. So we talked about it already, and Elizabeth has mentioned about biosecurity plans. But what a biosecurity plan is, it's basically a formal document that identifies the things that you should be doing on your farm to minimise those risks that we just identified. So, yeah, really setting out exactly what you're going to do to be able to maintain the health and welfare of the animals, but also the pests and weeds that you've got on your property, and all of the different things that you're going to do, so you can mitigate the risks that we assessed earlier. So this planning is really critical, and I think the best thing to think about in a plan is that it's the plan that you fall back on in times of adversity. So we have producers that have all these different challenges: droughts, floods, bushfires, emergency animal diseases. Let's hope not, but these things, in those times, this is the plan that we go to, and we say these are the things that we're putting in place to keep ourselves safe. So the 6 things that I would suggest are essential, and I'm sorry we can't go into all the detail of every single one of them. There is more information online, but so the farm inputs that you're bringing onto your property, the production practices that you're doing should be identified in that biosecurity plan. Your farm outputs, and as Elizabeth was talking about with traceability and things like that, what animal health statements are you putting out when you're sending them out, but also fit to load strategies, people, vehicles and equipment, and we'll go a little bit more into that. Feral animals and weeds, as they can be, feral animals can be vectors for some of these diseases. And finally, that train plan record is really important, so that everyone on your farm understands what biosecurity measures you need. They need to be doing. It shouldn't just be, I think the main thing that I want to impart on everyone is that after this biosecurity plan, there should be an action plan put in place as well. So you've done your risk assessment, you do the biosecurity plan, and then you do the action plan. So what actions are you going to take actively, and put a date on it so that you've got some really key things that you're going to do to be able to protect your business. And make sure it's not just a static document that you file away and you don't know where it is. So really making sure that these things are updated, because risks change. as I said, in terms of adversity, drought, you might be buying in livestock for the first time, and what does that mean for your business and the risks that your business that you have in your business? So I'm going to go a little bit faster on some of these because Elizabeth has touched off on some of it, but keeping records is really critical, and you can use a simple Excel spreadsheet, or you could do it in however way best suits you. And I know AgriWebb has some great features to be able to use to keep some of these treatment records, but also records about people movement, and that can help you assess your risk as well, and where people are coming in and moving. And I can't stress enough, these records are so critical for you to keep, because they are a part. They are just such a important thing. Like traceability is going to be the thing that gets us through in an emergency animal outbreak. So if we can use if we can get our traceability and take our time on that, I think it's really going to improve everyone's our livestock industries in South Australia. I just did it in Australia. So the next one is come clean, stay clean, go clean. It seems pretty simple, but it's just about having people coming to your property clean and moving around your property in a way that is mindful. So everyone will have seen the biosecurity signs, and having those biosecurity signs so that people are respecting their moving in and out. Having that is really important, but also thinking about where you might need to be installing boot washers. Are you if you've got contractors coming into your property, and what are the procedures that they need to take to maintain the health and safety of your business? Because it really comes down to you, and it's your responsibility to take the measures that and impart that on the people that are coming onto your property. And the one thing that I do find a lot with producers is, I feel a bit uncomfortable. Well, now's the time that we need to be doing it, and now's the time that we've actually got some really good things to say, look, this is really important to me, and I'm concerned about where you've been and what you're bringing onto my property. So I think if we all start doing it, I think we're all going to be better off in the long run. So having those standards that you require for people, and I'll just quickly show you a farm map idea that we promote, is around making some zones for your property. So the cool zone here is my friend's farm, and in this patch, anyone can go there. There's minimal action required. You don't need to, do too much when you come there, and there's no limit, unless obviously if you don't want your in-laws to be visiting, you can put limits on that. But I think the other thing, is being aware that area, you might not do any interventions. The warm area here is where, this is an example where my friend, they had a fodder drop. So that's the area that they have people accessing. It might be shearing sheds of silos or roadways and stockyards, those kinds of things. So these areas are the places that we need to limit access. But monitor for areas for weeds and pests. The hot zone, now this is probably the place that you're going to restrict people, and there are some challenges with restricting people with some of the services, and we're definitely putting some pressure on those services to be more mindful. But hot zones are where your production is undertaken and where crops are grown and grazed and stock grazed. So that's where that principle that I was talking about needs to be considered. And the final one is early detection. So early detection and surveillance is going to be what minimises the extent of an outbreak if it does happen, but it also improves the outcomes for your own farm. So a large number of, so early detection is key. Report any of the symptoms that I think are the key things to really think about. And this tip is look, check, ask a vet. I've moved into it. Report any of the symptoms that you see that are a bit unusual. And unusual is a weird word because you might, some of the emergency animal diseases actually look a lot like some of the endemic diseases that we have. But if you do have a large number of sick or dead animals, or you've got a fast spreading disease through a herd, or you're seeing animals that are lame, drooling or have saliva. And I think we've all seen the different, we should all be familiar with what the key emergency animal diseases in lumpy skin disease and foot and mouth disease are. But really school yourself up on that so that you know what to look for and when to call and when it's appropriate to call. And it is a legal requirement for if there's a notifiable disease on farm to report it. But also I think it's just important to have that 1-800 number at your tips, at the tip of your fingers. So if you are questioning what's going on, make sure that you've got that number. So you can call it, and they'll either tell you that it's a problem or it's not, and you need to get further investigation. And the other people that we really encourage people to be contacting is your private vet. And I'll go into that a little bit more. But private vets are really going to be critical in a surveillance outbreak, and we're going to be needing them. So we use them often as a reactive thing. But if we can start thinking about them as a more proactive activity around our biosecurity, that's going to be beneficial. So I'll just summarize. The 5 top tips are: know your risks, have a plan, keep records, come clean, stay clean, go clean, and look, check, ask a vet. And finally, there's a lot of resources here that we have: Animal Health Australia's website, Farm Biosecurity website, Integrity Systems Company, and the Livestock SA website has some really great resources on there. And I did go into that local vet. So that's my final slide. Your boundary fence is your greatest defence is where I think we all need to be thinking, what we all need to be thinking about. Thanks, David.
Thank you, Penny. That was really great. Some practical steps to get us all thinking. There is an interesting question in there, and I'll open it up to Elizabeth as well. But it's one that I think is important to discuss around how to bring our teams, our staff, our family members and contractors on board with taking on these practices. And Penny, you did allude to it in those steps there, which is great. But we did have a question around that. And for context, I will read that out for us. So one of our attendees has said they've got a small number of sheep, and when advising the sheep shearer that they would like the boots and any equipment to be disinfected prior to coming onto the yards, they were actually met with, okay, well, find someone else to do the job. I don't want to be liable in that scenario. So I think that's a very real scenario that we might see. And so I guess my question is, what's the advice in that scenario for the producer to be able to have that conversation?
Oh, it's a tough one. And I know it's one that makes people very uncomfortable. And I think if it is challenging with services, but I think if we all expect more, then we hopefully can achieve more. So the expectation is that these contractors are following these rules and doing the things that we're asking. And if it's a part of your biosecurity plan and you are actively using that as your policy for how you operate your farm, then I guess that's what you could fall back on. And I understand that's hard when you're seeking services, but I think right now is the time that we hold people accountable for their actions. And yeah, I think it's a hard one, David. Like, I agree, it's a tricky one, but if you're serious about your biosecurity, then we're going to have to accept that, okay, it's probably not, you're not the person for the job. Have I read that right, David?
Yeah, no, that's great. And Elizabeth, wondering if you have any thoughts around that one?
I mean, yeah, it is a tough one if you have people that aren't willing to do the things that you're requiring. I think under legislation, there's this thing called general duty for biosecurity, and if you have a management plan in place, people have to abide by it. And if they don't, then don't let them on your property. And yeah, the risk you take is the risk of, potential issues. So it's what risk you're willing to live with, I think. Yeah.
And that's a good point. Sorry, David.
Sorry.
That's a great point, is assess the risk for your own property.
Yeah. And there is another question in there as well, just continuing on from that, not necessarily around contractors, but around our neighbours, and what we can do to bring our neighbours on board as well. And certainly from my perspective, it's around, leading by example. Of course, we can't control another person's actions, but if we're taking on the practices, if we've got the plans in place, and that naturally extends out, and being open to having those conversations and sharing what plans you have in play and the practices that you run. But Elizabeth and Penny, if there's any additional comments there.
I can start. I would suggest that one of the best ways is being able to have conversations, and that line of communication with neighbours is really critical. And some people, from my experience, don't have that. So if you have that and you can have those conversations, that's excellent. Something I've been suggesting is strays policies, like creating a strays policy for your local community. If you find a stray sheep or a stray cow, don't just plonk it back in your neighbour's property. Having those policies around how we're going to treat these animals when they come back onto my property or when they're found on someone else's property, and that's around your risk assessment as well. What diseases might be on the other property, and assuming that there's always going to be, that you're bringing other people's problems onto your property. So having those strays policies might be a good way to start the conversation.
Yeah, and I think it's about what you can practically do. So I get a lot of questions around, utility providers coming onto the property, or having shared easements, or people accessing their property through your property. And necessarily they're not things that you can actually physically control, because utility providers have a legal right to maintain their infrastructure and make sure you have power and the telephone. So it's about, maybe you increase the monitoring that you're doing around those areas. And if your neighbour maybe is doing something they shouldn't be, or they've ignored advice to have a biosecurity plan, maybe monitor that stretch of land or the livestock when they're in that area a little bit more frequently, so that you're picking up on things to reduce your risk, and making sure that if you're finding diseases that you can report them. So
I also think engaging with local community, local land services, get involved in the discussions. And I think, again, it is all around raising awareness. And I think that's a good place to start as well in contributing to the community discussion. And the record keeping on farm, I think is definitely important as well. If there are any more questions, send them through onto the Q&A. And of course, we will be sharing the resources as well. And so you can engage with Integrity Systems, with Livestock SA, and any of the other bodies around those bits and pieces. So please send through your questions. And just before we wrap up the webinar, I just wanted to share my screen again and just quickly on Penny's point around the farm map and certain hot zones and things like that. I just wanted to share an example of how that could look in AgriWebb, being able to utilize that mapping function. So if everyone can see my screen, we've got the map displayed there, and so you can use this map to set those zones out, make it clear for everyone on farm, whether it's contractors or staff and family, with color coding those areas, and all of that will be able to be recorded in AgriWebb there. And I will also just reiterate the areas that we've spoken about here as well. So the LPA biosecurity plans, the NLIS and ENVD integrations. So whether you are managing that directly on the LPA website, or through AgriWebb. It's the same system there. So you'll be able to access those things, update the NLIS, submit those declarations equipped with the health declarations. And then the audit and compliance areas, feel free to reach out to our team. Our customer support team is available to answer any questions around how to access these areas, how to set up your inventory, how to look at the reports and filter those and get that information out as well. So there's many resources at your fingertips. And I'll also remind everyone, if you are new to AgriWebb, I'd encourage you to make use of the 30% off until the end of August. And then you can dive in and start where it begins with the record keeping and your internal practices. And then lastly, we have the resources available here. So as I said, post the webinar, we will be sending out these resources for you. You'll get a copy of this recording so that you can refer back to the detail that Elizabeth and Penny have both gone through with us. And you'll also find a video there on how to set up a biosecurity plan in AgriWebb. And so before we finish up, I will just check if there are any further questions on the channel that we will answer. And I think we have covered everything there. So what I might do is just throw it back to Penny and Elizabeth for any closing comments or key moments of advice. And then after that, we can wrap things up.
I suppose just on NLIS and the systems, if you get stuck on checking transfers or anything, you can always reach out to IC's call centre and they'll be able to help you investigate issues and things like that. So there is support available for an LPA and NLIS perspective if you ever get stuck. So other than that, yeah, do your livestock transfers and complete NVDs.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks to AgriWebb for putting this webinar on today. I think it's a really great opportunity to be able to share some of these practical tips. Some of them aren't new and a lot of them are just about being vigilant and controlling what is within your fence is what's going to be the thing that we can do. And around that, you know, having conversations early and making sure that any contractors and people that are coming onto your property are really or any of the people and training and things like that, getting as people as upskilled as possible early is going to be what helps protect us.
Absolutely. Thank you both. I've really appreciated listening to the content today on both the requirements and policy around biosecurity risks and also the practical steps in how to mitigate these risks at a farm level. So I really appreciate it, Penny and Elizabeth, and thank you to everyone who has joined us. Please do continue to do your research and engage in the conversation. But we will leave you there and thank you. Have a good afternoon. Goodbye.
Thanks, David. Bye.